Trigger is a special type of store procedure that are automatically execute when a specific event occur in table or database. Trigger are mainly used for auditing validation, logging, and enforcing the business rule. So, what is trigger? Trigger is a special type of store procedure. Store procedure. What is store procedure? Store procedure is a set of rules and regulation of SQL query which is pre-compiled stored in database. So this is a store procedure. Now trigger is a special type of store procedure which execute on a specific event occur. What is the specific event occur? A specific event occur means maybe insert, update, delete operation occur or logout. So basis of that different events we have. So basis of that we have mainly three types of triggers. One is the DML trigger, a second one is DDL trigger, and third one is logon trigger. What is DML trigger? DML means data manipulation language. What is the data manipulation language? As I already explained in my previous video, data manipulation language are in which we can manipulate the data. What is the manipulation? Means insert, update, delete operation we perform is called uh, data manipulation. So if we are so DML trigger means data manipulation language trigger means in which insert, update, delete operation occur on the table at the time DML trigger execute. Same way DDL trigger, DDL means data definition language. Data definition language means create, drop, alter trigger, right? So create DDL trigger once create, alter, or drop event over at that time this trigger execute. Third one is the logon trigger. Logon trigger means it's a special type of trigger once fired a user logon on SQL server. Once a user log on the server, then at that time this trigger execute. Now let's read all these three in detail. So we have a three trigger. One is the DDL, another is DML, and third one is the logon trigger. In DML trigger, definition is the DML trigger fire on insert, update, delete operation perform occur on the table. These are the two types. One is the after trigger and second one is the instead of trigger, right? So after trigger execute after DML operation is completed. Means whatever insert, update or delete is going on, once this operation perform like after insert, after update or after delete, this trigger perform, right? For example, after trigger we create a trigger after insert means we are going to insert something in table and after that this trigger will perform. So how we create? We write create means that we have to right click on the table and then from there we have option means the UI you can click and create trigger. But apart from this you can write like this as well, that create trigger name, then on table on which table you want to create. So create trigger name on the table name and after insert. After delete you want to perform, then write after delete. After update you want to perform, then after update you can write, and then whatever you want to means after trigger if you want to insert a data in another table, after insert you want to um, update another table record, or after insert if you want to delete another record, so that type of thing anything you can perform. So how we can write that trigger? Create trigger name on which table you want to perform, and after insert r slash after update r slash after delete, and then as begin and end, and the begin and in between that you can write whatever you want to do the perform the x, right? This is after trigger. Instead of trigger, same way, only we have to write instead of, right? Execute instead of DLML operation. For example, create trigger name on the table on which table you want to. Instead of means if a user want to delete, then don't delete that record or don't delete that thing what a user want to delete. So if he's user trying to delete the record at that time, what we have to perform? Create trigger means to prevent the deleting of a record, we can add add this trigger, right? Or if a user want that if you don't want to update any record at that time you want to perform a trigger, so for that you can perform that one. So create trigger name whatever the trg instead of trigger on the table name instead of, here you can use insert, update or delete whatever you want. It's up to you as begin and end. And the begin and it between that, what action you want to perform, you can write there. Right. This is the instead of trigger. Now, second trigger is the DDL trigger. Right. So DDL trigger, as I already told you, data definition language and data definition language create, alter, and drop event occurs. Right. So during the creation of the table, during the drop of table, what if you want any trigger at the time you can write create trigger name prg prevent drop means don't want to drop, right, on the database, right, on which database, for the table, on which table you want, right. So here there is a little bit different. There where what we were doing, create trigger name on which table, but here it's a for the DML command, so we have to write on database, right, as well as for which table, right, for table name. If you want to prevent to drop ABC table, a drop table is your table name, then and if you want to prevent it, then you can write that way, create trigger name prevent drop on database for the table name and as begin, and dropping table is not allowed means roll back or whatever you want to do, you can do it like that. So this is the DDL trigger. Now there is the logon trigger. Logon trigger is fired when the user log on to SQL server at that time. For example, restrict logon time. Right. So create trigger name on the server. See, one was on the basis of table on table, then another was the database, and third one is the server. All server on logon as begin print logon fire. Means at that time if you want to fire something or if user logged in your server at that time you want to log in something, so at that time you can fire that. So we have once again I want to revise all these things. There are three types of the trigger: DDL trigger, DML trigger, and logon trigger. DDL trigger, that is the data definition language. For that it's a two type: after trigger and instead of trigger. After trigger it's execute, create, delete, update after if you want to perform any action, and instead of trigger means insert, update, delete if a user is doing, and if you don't want to do same thing at that time, instead of insert, instead of update, instead of delete, if you want to perform another action instead of, right. And then this is the DDL DML trigger, and then DDL trigger is the data definition language. For this create, alter, and drop table action perform. In that we can create table name and on server and then table on which table you want that to prevent or stop or do any action. So for that on table, like create trigger name on database server, means database name and then table name, for which table you want to, you can see here, for which table means on database, then for which table you want to perform, then action, right. And logon server, logon trigger is when a user logged in a SQL server at the time if you want to perform any action, so called logon trigger, right. Special trigger table, std and delete trigger, store new record, delete trigger, deleted trigger store old records, right. Used mainly update and delete triggers, that is another thing. But yes, interviewer if asked to you at that time, you can say there are three types of trigger: DDL trigger, DML trigger, and logout trigger. DDL trigger two type, after and instead of trigger, after trigger, and DML trigger, in that only one type of the trigger on which we have to use trigger name and on the database, and on create, alter, create, drop, and alter on the table you can perform any action, then that is the DDL trigger. And logon trigger when user logged in, right. So I think all these trigger you remember, and you can see here once again I can show you DTL, DA, DML, sorry, DTL, and then log. Thank you.